I'm back. Sorry, you heard me before. I'm back. Um, a fun fact about me though is I worked at Pizza Hut, not like these guys. I worked in a store, answering phones back in the old days where you called for your pizza, and I loved my personal pan pizza. It was the best. It was the best.
We always say you can make any pizza, personal pan pizza, if you try hard enough. So
There you go. Um, thank you again for sharing. I think, as you heard from me earlier, I like to think it's about the people in addition to the work. And I think your guys' backgrounds is really unique. And we've heard a lot on the panel first thing this morning about people working from different categories. You both come from outside the QSR space. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and where you came from?
yeah, sure. So I would say QSR is such a weird, interesting industry because it's really fast paced and it's driven by like a daily KPI is same store sales growth. So every single day, all your stakeholders know how your system sold or didn't sell. And previously to working in QSR, I worked at tech companies. I worked at Samsung for a while and I worked at some creative agencies. And I think there's something about the pace of QSR is a little frenetic and chaotic, and either you're a person who like enjoys a bit of that kind of craziness, or you do not enjoy that and you do not stay very long. The other part for QSR, I think in the past they'd been a little bit behind on technical innovations, mostly driven by, you go there and often you're ordering off a menu board and you're not necessarily driven to a website on some occasions. So I think QSR as a whole had fallen a little bit behind the pace of the rest of industries in marketing. And so when I joined Pizza Hut, a lot of it was just taking some of my best practices from tech companies and saying, how can you be really tech forward and how do you have a customer mindset and have really focused KPIs to say, how can you feel like you're moving the needle or not? And being okay with saying, sometimes it's time to change.
Okay.
So I mean, I totally agree with you on the fast pace. So my career has been in retail. I worked for TJ Maxx, Marshalls, and Home Goods for a really long time, and I think that also has the same KPI of same store sales, looking at comp every day and looking at categories. And the interesting part about those stores, as you know, is that they sell pretty much everything. So you can walk in there and be like, oh, I need a cat scratcher and I also need a white t-shirt. And looking at category sales was really interesting to be able to play that forward to coming to Pizza Hut. So, we're constantly, I think one of the things that we're doing, especially as we try to build out more occasions and more day parts, is we need that fast pace, but also that broader view with our teams to say, okay, if we're going to launch this individual occasion, how are we balancing it out with some group occasions and making sure that we're still like, if we're focusing on Gen Z, that we're still being relevant to families and moms who are, needing to feed a large group. So yeah, I think that the experience in retail and the fast pace and because those brands are very TJX and brands are very opportunistic, I think it's really important in our business to be able to say like, how do you pivot and make sure that you can say, okay, this isn't working, what should, and know when to have some stick to itness and when to move off of things.
By the way, I'm just going to point something out for you guys in the front row. Did you see these earrings? It's pretty awesome. Pizza earrings, by the way, pretty awesome.
The retailer and me have to
Had to
stop a bunch
happen.
of stuff.
Okay, sorry to go off topic. So you shared a lot in the presentation about the success of transforming the brand, but it's not always easy, right? Like you encounter some challenges along the way. So what were some of those big challenges that you had? At least like what did you kind of run into in the last period of really trying to modernize the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge is like that younger customer who is at the point of brand adoption. That's a really, really tough customer to get. And when like Lindsay pointed out that QSR as an industry sometimes lags on tech. One of our, there we have a competitive set of Domino's, Papa John's, Little Caesars, and Independents. And one of the things that's really quite resonant with that 18 to 24 is the ability to get something easy. So it's easy to notice, but it's also easy to access, easy to afford, So that ease piece, I think, has been a really, really difficult for us in the transformation. And we have had to lean into making the brand famous and work with our product team and our tech team to make sure that we are prioritizing how to make this brand easy and then how and when we can communicate. So I think that's one of, I would say, the biggest roadblocks for us. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the other part that's hard, and maybe it's like the difference of how we spend our time, is like managing stakeholder opinions.
Yeah.
Because when you are making something modern and cool, like what I think is modern and cool is probably not what the rest of the leadership team or board thinks is modern and cool.
I mean, you talk about like grease stains on a box, right? That'd be something that would be so taboo.
Yeah, it kind of gave some people hives. And then when we launched it and it stood apart in the category. So that's that's kind of the stick to itness, is that Lindsay's like the best CMO, because some of our teams here, like, she's a great shield at saying, okay, great. Yep. Awesome. Thank you for your thoughts. And we're going to continue to try this. So having some stick to itness also.
They're like, thanks for your feedback. Goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks for those thoughts and feelings.
Well, I think the thing that's most resonant in everything you shared is like that connection to culture, which we can all talk about that, but as we are not the demographic that you're trying to reach, it can be challenging.
First off, you're all the demographic I'm trying to reach. I want to sell to all of you.
Pizza for everyone.
Lindsay will take anyone's money.
All the money. But as you're trying to stay relevant in culture and be on top of things, what are some of the like tips or things that you're doing to really stay on top of the culture, Lindsay? Like, I didn't know that was
yes,
for me.
I do a lot of TikTok scrolling, which I like to say is an excuse to stay in culture. But I also think the best like customer innovations, the best insights, the best trends, if you can put your customer hat on. And so what are they talking about, looking at, reading? There's not a lot of people who are under 30 who are spending a ton of time watching TV. So then making sure we're in new medias that those customers are at. I think the other thing is, like, Elyse kind of talked on this, but I'll repeat it, is that just trying a lot of things and seeing what works and being okay with that. I also think in a world where you have so much data, like I interviewed someone the other day and I loved, he said, it's like data everywhere, but not an insight to drink. And so how can you be really focused on what do you think is important to move your business? Because I think we can all relate where you're going to have conflicting KPIs. Like, we launch something and it'll say, hey, we had a 5-point increase in brand affinity, but you saw a negative point on brand for me, or your click-through was up, but your conversion was down. And so when you have all of these KPI stacks, how do you start off? That would be my best tip. How do you start off by saying, what does success look like? And how are we all aligned on how we're going to measure it? And then that, I think, gives you the freedom to try a bunch of things to see what works. So for us, like, we've leaned in pretty heavily on TikTok in the last few years. And Elyse and team have done a really great job of building really authentic connections with influencers and trying new medias too.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, is like, what are those kind of, TikTok obviously being a big thing, YouTube with the world record pizza. Like, what are you finding in these new channels? Are you thinking about other channels? Like, what's been your experience? Because I know a lot of brands I'll advertise on TikTok, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to do there. So what's been your experience?
Yeah, I think one of the things that our team has done a really good job at is having the courage to not be the voice of a lot of the work. So we've really leaned into creators and letting them do the work, which gives, talk about hives, like that gives me hives to be like, oh my God, what are they going to say about the pizza? Are they going to talk about the brand in a really favorable way? But I would say, almost 10 times out of 10, having creator-led work, especially in these new platforms. I mean, TikTok just launched Lemonade, which is like TikTok and Pinterest having a baby. I encourage everyone to go check it out. It's awesome because people are coming to those platforms to look for ideas, to look for entertainment. And the creators that live and create on those platforms every day know how to make content that's motivating, that's funny, that's interesting, and that's engaging. So giving the reins over to other people, as much as it, may make you uncomfortable and nervous, Yeah, and scared, like that has been a really great recipe for success for us. And then like Lauren, who's in our audience, she leads our influencer agency and program. She does an awesome job at, getting to know the creators, at briefing the creators, like making a really, really strong relationship with them. So they have a vested interest in making awesome content and then supplying them with like the right things to do. So part of the reason we did World's Largest Pizza is because we knew that all of those TikTokers would want to come take pictures of it and they'd want to come film it and they'd want to put stuff up on their channels. So having content rich experiences or things, or even if it's swag or gifts or silly things like that, just making sure it's interesting. So that's one of the ways that like we've really leaned in on new media is by leaning on others to do it.
I think I'm gonna go fast forward a little bit. Like that world's largest pizza thing is so fascinating, and I think it's brave as a brand to finally say yes to a creator that's like coming to do that. What I mean, how do you cook a pizza like that? Like what goes into like
Elyse literally stretched some of that dough to make that pizza. So she's the lady.
It was there was a lot of sweat equity and cheese. There's a lot of cheese. So I think that world's largest pizza, I mean, it was a really interesting activation because it was the idea of a creator. And he said, I want to do the world's largest pizza. I want to make the world's largest pizza, celebrate 10 million followers on 10 million subs on YouTube. And I want to do it with Pizza Hut. I'm going to call you out. And he had no idea how to make it. And, so we do as a brand, we have the budget to be able to help and like the production resources. So it was kind of like this, like, even we say when we're interviewing people, like readiness meets opportunity. So like we had the opportunity, we had a really great product that we were launching and he had a really great idea. And so we came together and that was another thing. Like we really gave that creator, we really gave Eric the reins. And as much as like the control freak in me and all the people on my team and our agency wanted to be like, hey, why don't we each take over the whole thing? And like, why don't we just do it? And we'll just do it for you. And you can just be over here. It was actually more authentic that his team ran it because you saw in the, like, every time I see that video, there's like a part of the pizza is huge, like what ended up because it's 132 feet across. It, there's this huge part that's like a sauce spot. And it's because Eric, who's a 25-year-old dude who makes crazy TikTok and YouTube videos, he wanted to spray sauce through a fire hose and spray it onto the pizza. Now, and he wanted to do it at 2:00 in the morning, and you know what? So that was it's kind of the courage that you have to say like I'm willing to take a risk and let you do something crazy that you think is going to make better content, because if you make better content about this whole event, then we are going to have more eyeballs and a better result. So like I hate that sauce spot on pizza. It drives me nuts.
I was so surprised to hear you call it out here because I know how much you hate it.
I hate it.
We're all looking for the soft spot now.
I also think
I photoshopped it out in our Super Bowl commercial.
The other part is when you give creators a little bit of, I think, the same point of focus, and you say like, it's really hard from the brand not to say like, hey, what would be super cool is if you had mentioned we're launching this new product. It's crispy, loaded. It's this. It's $6.99. You can get it online. Driver tip is not a blah blah blah. And instead, giving them one or two things to land in the way that works for them. So the content, the reason people follow them is so they can get content that feels like them, and you give them the space to make content that feels like them. The other flip for the brand is like he was at like the Streamies or an awards show, and he on his own is giving brand love, which isn't paid and isn't planned, and so. I think if you can find that fluidity in a relationship where you can get the best out of both.
Yeah. But I mean, I didn't answer about cooking. That was the other thing that I would say that like when you do these content rich experiences, what I like to call them, and you're kind of like bringing something together that you haven't done. Like we had our PR team did a really nice job about seeing around corners and like what were going to be the potential things that could happen and what are going to be the potential messages. And one thing I would say that we didn't get around is that we did have a lot of people say, ew, oh my God, gross. You're like cooking the pizza on the floor. Like, how are you doing that? And like, ew, you're going to give it. And so like, we probably could have done a better job at getting ahead of the messaging early on, because realistically, when Eric's YouTube video came out, he told the full story, which is we had a food safety officer like literally trailing me around, making it be like, oh, is everyone wearing hairnets? I need to make sure that this whole room is cooled to 45 degrees, so the food that you're using, the cheese, is at a proper temperature. And then we cooked it, which is crazy, with patio heaters, which they made into a Zamboni.
Amazing.
So they basically took like one of those dolly carts and then like hung patio heaters over it. And then as the pizza was laid down, it was like the dough was like baked first a little bit. It's called par baked, so it's half baked. And then we'd put sauce and cheese, and then they would drive that thing over it to cook it in 30-second increments, which is why it took like 36 hours.
Big brands, they're just like us. They
Yeah.
also don't know.
Yeah. No, but
Just like
we had to make sure that the messaging that we were talking about, like it was required, for example, from Guinness, that we donated every single bite of that food. So 58,000 slices got donated to LA Food Bank. We didn't do a good enough job at like talking about that right out of the gate. So that's the one thing I would say is just like as you're taking risks, see around corners, think through what some of like the potential reaction could be. And I think that's been really helpful for us. But obviously we don't hit it every single time.
that was literally what I was going to ask, is like the recommendation, because getting the Guinness Book of Records, like having something is an amazing way to stand out and set your place in culture. Like, are there any other, I mean, that's clearly a good lesson learned, but any suggestions to anyone that might have this idea, like if you're going to go that route?
Don't try to break the world record. We can't do it again.
Stay away from pizza.
People keep asking us, they're like, you should make the smallest pizza.
Personal pan. No, I think recommendations for friends trying the same thing is a good one. I think part of it's managing, I think at the very beginning, managing stakeholder opinions and getting them prepped, and then being really focused on what is an acceptable outcome and what is not, because there's always going to be something that could have
Something's going to go sideways.
better. Yeah. Especially anything that's like a big event or experiential piece. Anyone who has ever done that kind of stuff, they never go as planned. So I think just being really planful on the upfront of managing expectations, and then as much as you can plan for the unexpected, and give yourself a little bit of grace, because like you're never gonna get 100% of it.
The other thing I would say is like, I try to manage with like the team. We all discuss like the amount of time and calories we're going to put into something personally, because it's not only like the budget, it's also the time and calories on our team that we could be putting towards other products, other initiatives. And we need to make sure that like the input is going to yield enough output. So I totally agree on Lindsay's point about like what's an acceptable outcome and how much work are we putting into this, and are we over investing time and calories, or should we dial back so we can invest in other things.
Yeah, and so we almost have time, so I have one question, because I think I know the answer, but I'm not going to assume. Trying all of these cool things and working with creators and doing all the you guys do to use new channels, measurement is something we always talk about, and you talk about in-store sales lift, right? Like, how are you guys looking at measurement and thinking about that complicated?
Yeah, I mean that's a really, I think that's like the toughest thing that we all do as marketers, because we can look, we have so much data available to us, both for sales data, but as well as like engagement data that we can look at. But when it comes to things that are more intangible, like like that Melts disclosure agreement, or like this world's largest pizza, I think what I look at as a barometer is how many people outside of marketing. So like I asked you, some people raised your hand. If I probably, like when I asked you how many people had tried Melts, it was far fewer. So I like, for a barometer for me is like, did some random girl from high school Instagram DM me and say, oh my gosh, you work at Pizza Hut? I saw that they did this Guinness Book of World Records. So there's some that are intangible to say, how do you know that you are like making an impact in culture? And I think Lindsay and I both always talk about this. If like people outside of marketing are actively coming up to us and saying, I heard about this, then that's like a win, that you know that you're making an impact, that maybe engagement rate or video completion rate of something that is not going to be able to tell you.
I was going to say also, I think it's a little bit of balancing. We say it's brand over time and sales overnight. And so you want to consistently build brand affinity during these bigger brand moments, but you still have to like crank the performance engine of driving sales. And then I think Elyse does a much better way of articulating it. But it's like if the goal is talk value and getting share worthy content out there, one mindset shift I think we've done a good job of moving the organization is like not a lot of people read like QSR Times and restaurant news. No. And so, you might be able to get that coverage, but if you're really trying to drive a new audience, we have to get talked about in a new way, in a new medium. And so that's a great barometer of saying, do people actually talk about you that are outside of like your small sphere? And I told this story at another conference, but I was out with my family and I saw a woman I knew and her teenage son came and I was wearing my Pizza Hut swag because I, always repping. Yeah. And also I like free stuff. And he interrupted us and he was like, hey, I saw that you guys broke the world record. And the mom texted me and said her son was like, oh, I'm surprised that's your mom friend because I was cool. And I have the text to prove it. But I think that's an indicator of we're really trying to get after getting talk value with Gen Z. The mom didn't know what he was talking about, but he went out of his way to prompt that conversation. And he was associating me with a cool brand in a cool moment that was driven by culture.
And I think that plays into the stick-to-itness, right? Like you stick with it because you get that positive affirmation. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you
for sharing.